Hello, Type Weekend. My name is Shani, and I'm the Ismar David Assistant Curator at RIT Cary Graphic Arts Collection. Today, I'd like to share with you our rare collection of Hebrew wood type. First, I'd like to introduce you to the Cary collection. The Cary was founded in 1969, and it is one of the world's premier libraries on graphic communication history and practices. Our growing library holds over 45,000 volumes and over 130 archival collections. Our technology collection focuses on preserving the heritage of letterpress printing. In our press room, we maintain working printing presses and all the additional equipment that is needed for printing. Our historic collection is very much alive. It is being preserved through its active use in a wide range of activities, like classes and workshops, special events, and visits from scholars and artists in residence. The Cary's typeface collection includes thousands of metal and wood fonts, the majority of which are American-made, and up until 2014, all of which were exclusively of Latin characters. In an effort to expand the collection coverage of global scripts, the Cary acquired a rare and important collection of some 40 fonts of Hebrew wood type. Acquiring this collection was the beginning of a long process of converting the letters into archival objects that are accessible for printing, teaching, and research. The first step was to carefully clean and restore the wood types. This was made possible through the Adopt a Font volunteer program initiated by our associate curator and master printer, Amelia Fontenelle. Most of the volunteers were not familiar with the Hebrew script, and yet they did a great job of cleaning, measuring, and sorting the type into boxes according to their size. Once the type was cleaned, it was time to look closely at the design of the letters and identify each of the style variations, so we can then typeset each different font for proof printing. We started doing this just as COVID-19 hit. So as you can see here, I'm setting the type in galleys at home and spacing them with corrugated cardboard. And once I completed the sets, I sent them over to Amelia to print in the Cary press room when it was possible, or in her home press with the help of Finn the dog. Last February, we were able to come back to the Cary press room to continue the work. With the grant we received from the Rochester Area Community Foundation's Historic Preservation, Restoration, and Literature Fund, we were able to add student employee Kat Ward to our team. And here you can see her typesetting and proofing a set of letters. So now, after about 70 print runs, the entire collection is sorted into boxes. It is fully processed and cataloged and available as a historic resource. I'd like to quickly take you through our online finding aid, where you can find all the information about the collection and how it was processed. You can also take a very deep dive into this monster spreadsheet that has specific information about each font, its condition, the total number of sorts, the missing sorts, altered letters, and more. And you can also find our digital collection and have a closer look at the images and the proofs. You are more than invited to use these files for your own research and work. You can see here photographs of the letters typesets in their galleys and the proof that we printed. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you can read all the information about that specific font. I was able to identify two main style variations, which I named after design features that could be seen across the type. I was also able to identify these three weights: regular, condensed, and extra condensed. So at this point, we have a clear idea of what the collection holds. I was ready to dig in deeper and further the research of these typefaces. And I was very interested to try and come up with answers for some important questions, like where did the typefaces come from? What was printed with them? And who printed them? So these questions are tricky to answer since none of the wood type blocks in the collection have a manufacturer mark and their provenance is still obscure. Their height to paper is American size at about 0.918 inches, so it is probably safe to assume they are American made from the 19th century. So the first step I took was to hunt for type specimens so I could visually analyze the letters and compare the design in the specimens with our printing proofs. I'm very grateful to David Shields, who shared the many Hebrew specimens he has collected for his own research. I very quickly learned that the process of comparing the letters in the specimen with our proofs was not ideal. First of all, the specimens show only random letters and not the entire alphabet. For the letters that did appear, I had only edited photos of the pages, not the originals or flat scans. And then there are the many variables that has to do with the differences in which the two printing were produced, different presses, different papers, different inks, different letter sizes, and so on. But I think the design features are distinct and you can see clearly when the typeface style matches. Like here, on the left, there are letters as they are shown in Tab's 1909 specimen. And on the right is how I recreated it with our own type. This is Empire Word Company, 1926. Eastern Brass and Wood Type Company after 1920. And Hamilton Wood Type. And I would like to thank Jim Moran of the Hamilton Wood Type Museum, who shared with me their patterns and the information he has about them. I also was able to see here that the type was available in 3-line to 40-line only, and these are the exact sizes that we have in our collection. So what do we know so far? The American type height, 2 styles, 3 weights, large type sizes from 3-line to 40-line, manufactured and used between 1830s and 1970s, and served the Jewish American communities. So I want to share with you how I think the stories of those Jewish Yiddish-speaking immigrant communities were reflected through their typography. And to better understand that, I want to take you way back to the beginning and talk very briefly about the development of the Hebrew script and type. The modern Hebrew letter developed from the Aramaic or Assyrian alphabet around 560 BCE. Hebrew was the language of the Israelites and the Judean people for over 1300 years, when about 200 BCE it died as a spoken language and was restricted to religious practice. It was only reintroduced as a spoken language around the 1880s. So for this very long period of time, Hebrew was only read and copied. Scribes had to follow strict rules and could not change the holy letters, even at the cost of poor readability. The shapes of the letter forms were fixed and did not undergo the natural evolution that a secular script would, like the Latin script, for example. The invention of printing was welcomed with enthusiasm by Jewish communities that were scattered in Europe amongst other nations. As religious Hebrew manuscripts played a central role in their lives, printing them instead of copying them by hand increased the production and distribution of these texts and contributed to Hebrew readership. But the shift from written form to movable type was quite problematic. Punch cutters had no clear model of the Hebrew letters. Most of them did not know the script and language, so they just copied shapes from existing manuscripts, usually of poor readability. While there was a period of some typographic development in the 15th century in Europe, it was relatively brief. The Jewish people suffered persecution and were often forced to flee and relocate their presses. That prevented the continuous natural development that is needed for the refinement and improvement of type. One example of the slow and challenging development of Hebrew type can be seen in the shortage of typographic styles in Hebrew typefaces. Until the early 20th century, there was one predominant style of type. It was manufactured in various foundries, mostly in Europe, in several design variations. It was usually called the generic name meruba, which means square in Hebrew. This is a reference to the square shape of the Hebrew formal writing style. So imagine this typographic reality, one style to rule them all, across all printed formats for very different uses, whether it is a textbook printed with small type that requires typographic differentiation, or a newspaper that demands narrower letters in order to fit in more words on a sheet, or a broadside that calls for a large and expressive display type. If we compare it with Latin type, at the time, Hebrew had no equivalent of a cursive and italic style, no sans serif, no display styles. All the type variations were heavily based on the meruba style, and in some cases, they were created by people who were not familiar with the Hebrew script, and once again, copied shaped from existing sources. As in the case of the first Hebrew printing in America. This is the Bay of Psalm book. It is considered to be the first book printed in colonial America in 1640. And it includes a preface on Hebrew poetry and language written by the clergyman and theologian Richard Mather. In it, Mather included 5 Hebrew words. The printer, Stephen Day, didn't have a Hebrew font, and he had to carve the letters from wood, which means they had to be considerably larger than the metal type English book text. So the first Hebrew printed words were not meant for Hebrew readers and speakers. And I think that even without understanding the script, you can see how clumsy and inconsistent the letters look. In the following decades, we see more examples of single Hebrew words, Hebrew names of months, and Hebrew proverbs incorporated within scripture books. Only in 1735, the first book with passages of Hebrew text was published. It was a Hebrew grammar book by Judah Muniz, a convert to Christianity and the first instructor of Hebrew in Harvard College. For that printing, a complete set of Hebrew metal type was sent by a benefactor from London as a gift to Harvard. So here we also see the Hebrew that was not printed for Hebrew or Yiddish speakers. It was printed specifically for the use of students for whom Hebrew was a required project. At that time, the Jewish American community was small, and they got their books from Europe. But from 1820 through the 1924, an increasingly steady flow of Jews made their way to America, and a new market developed. For example, here we can see Isaac Lesser's English translation of Sporadic Prayers from 1837. Some decades later, Jews living in Eastern Europe under the Russian Tsar were brutally attacked by their non-Jewish neighbors and imperial officials. They were physically segregated and suffered oppressive laws that barred them from almost all means of providing for themselves. A vast number of these Yiddish-speaking Jews managed to leave a centuries-old legacy behind and flee to the US to establish their new homes. Here is footage from New York City around 1939, and we can see Yiddish signs for Jewish American businesses, mostly hand-painted and all based on the meruba style. When the letters are well painted, the tool keeps them consistent and balanced, and the painter can control their proportion, the spacing between them, and the composition. Transforming those qualities into Hebrew printed typography was a challenge. Here is an example. On the left is the hand-painted sign of the M. Miller printing of better quality, and we can compare it with the wood type. So on the right, there are some digitized letters from our collection. Notice the bottom horizontal strokes. These are all written in the same way, in the same direction. That means that the in-stroke should look the same. The left part should have the same angle for the gimel, the nun, and the pei. So this is the gimel's angle. This is the pei's angle. And the nun has a curve. Perhaps this was also created by a non-native that is not familiar with the scripts and the letter structure and simply copied the shapes. As I am exploring and analyzing Hebrew and Yiddish type and typography through physical typesetting and printing, the slowness and tactility of the letterpress process provides me with a deep perspective. It has changed the way I think and use type and understand its history and development. I want to share with you just one of the things that I've discovered so far. I think that all of these discoveries shine a light on what printing Hebrew letters meant and also how the practice possibly affected and damaged the design of the letter forms. Out of the 27 Hebrew letters, there are squarish in shape and generally look similar to one another. There are 6 letters that have descenders. The strokes that extend below the baseline help with letter differentiation. However, 4 of them are final letters. Final letters are alternative characters that are used only when they appear at the end of the word. And that leaves us with only 2 letters that appear in high frequency and they have descenders, the Ein and the Kuf. We noticed that a lot of those letters that have descenders in our collection are broken. Here is the letter Ein in its full form, and 2 broken Eins next to it. During the printing process, the descender would sometimes break. That was because the bottom part of the block was not supported. This was done to allow for easier and faster typesetting. But if the typesetter did not secure the bottom part of the letter, it would break under the pressure of the press. As we can see here, it seems that sometimes those broken parts would be filed after they were broken in the shape of the block, and that altered the original design of the letter. What is very unfortunate to see is that the altered form seemed to infiltrate future design, as we can see in these typefaces that were cut in this shape. That practice probably made its way into the design of metal type versions of the merubah typefaces, as we can see in the design of this typeface from 1939. On the right is the letter Ein and the sequence and direction of the strokes used to write it. Compared with the typeface design on the left, we can see that the shape of the bottom end stroke might be mimicking the shape of the rectangular wood block. What I see here is another example of copying shapes from existing sources that mistreated the Hebrew letter. This can be seen from the 15th century all the way to the 19th century, where designers who had no knowledge or understanding of the anatomy of the Hebrew letter reproduced letters shapes that made absolutely no sense to native Hebrew and Yiddish readers. It is interesting for me to see how the descending stroke of the Ein has disappeared over the years in many Hebrew typefaces, mostly in the monolinear styles that are used as an equivalent to the Latin sans serif. I personally feel that reintroducing that descender could be an informed design solution for letter differentiation. As always, there is so much more to research and so many mysteries to try and solve. We invite you all to use this historical resource and keep it alive and active so we all can learn more from it. I'd like to end with this video of a multilingual print that we created in the Cary press room with our motto in 3 languages: preservation through use in English, שימור באמצעות שימוש בעברית, and Aufentung durch Benutzen in Yiddish. Thank you.